been a while since I've been in Singapore. This is the first place I ever got arrested. When I was 18, and I was on my way to Hong Kong to work for a year in a children's home, an orphanage. And I arrived in Singapore because in those days you couldn't fly direct to Hong Kong. You had to stop en route. And I got arrested. And you may find this somewhat hard to believe because I had an awful lot of very long hair. And in those days, if your hair went below the collar, you got arrested. And I was actually kept in a cell and then put on the plane the next day to Hong Kong. So it's very nice to have a slightly warmer greeting here this time. As Anna has mentioned, I have been the religious advisor on the environment to His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's husband, which has occasionally been a little bit like being etiquette advisor to Attila the Hun. But the meals are very good and rather fun. And when I told him that I was coming here to talk about these sort of issues, he said, well, tell them the story about Queen Victoria's diet. And Queen Victoria, in the 1880s, in her 60s, had got rather portly. And her doctor said, Madam, you need to go on a diet. And she went, okay, fine, yes, all right. And so he prescribed a whole diet for her and laid it all out. It was extremely scientific and well thought through. And he said, I'll come back in 6 weeks' time and weigh you again, madam, because, you don't kind of weigh royalty too often. It's a little bit like whales, really. And so he comes back after six weeks, and she's put on weight. She put on a lot of weight. So he says, Madam, are you taking the diet? She said, yes, before every meal. So we have a history of not always quite grasping what we're supposed to get. And by the way, I bring another message from Her Majesty the Queen to all our American friends who, if you're feeling after your little experiment in being a republic in order not to have a mad king in charge, that you'd like to come back. You're very welcome, and most of our royalty is relatively sane. So that sort of gives you a little bit of the context. What Prince Philip and I set up 25 years ago was an organization, secular organization, designed to work with every major religion in the world to help them develop, according to their own teachings and values, environmental programs. Not to try and make them all the same, because they're not. Thank God. They're wonderfully diverse. But to actually draw upon their wisdom and their experience. And I'm going to talk about the wisdom a bit in a moment, but I'm also just going to mention the fact that the faiths are major stakeholders in the planet. We've done a series of audits of the faiths around the world. 8% of the habitable surface of the planet is owned by religions. 5% of all commercial forests. Over 50% of all schools are still run by the faiths, a quarter of all universities. In sub-Saharan Africa, according to UNICEF, 64% of all schools are run by the faith because, frankly, the states have collapsed. And if it wasn't for the Muslims and the Christians and the Hindus, there would be no education. They also provide 500 million meals a day. Through schools, through hospitals, they run a third of all medical facilities worldwide. Through rituals, through passages, through celebrations and festivals. They are major consumers as well as producers. And they are also constitute about 19% of the total financial market. And we have recently set up a new organization called Faith Invest, which is working with, at the moment, just under $1 trillion worth of religious investments that have made a written commitment that they wish to move into environmental and sustainable investing. Because for too long, there has been a Chinese wall between how the faiths have raised their money to do good things and the relationship between what that money is coming from. And the faiths, as you may know, are amongst the major disinvestors from fossil fuels. We're asking them, we know what you're against, what are you for? Which is quite often a challenge to the religions. But perhaps more pertinently for you, 400 million people go on pilgrimage every year. 70% of tourism in France is pilgrimage. And that's not counting the years when the Kumbh Mela takes place, which happens every 12 years. Kumbh Mela is the largest single gathering of human beings on the planet. It takes place in India at the convergence of 3 rivers, and it is between 100 million and 120 million. And we've been working with many of the major swamis there to try and green that. As you can imagine, there's an awful lot of work to be done on that. So I find myself wondering why you're all so scared of spirituality, why you're even more scared about the word faith, and why if you mention the word religion, you can see the eyes closing. 80% of the world's population claim to be members of one of the major religions. It guides and directs most people's lives. So why are you so worried about it? Well, I want to take you briefly into exploring 3 different faiths to give you perhaps a sense of what you might be missing, particularly if you don't grapple with the major traditions. And I want to look at this classic division of mind, body, soul, or mind, body, spirit, because it runs through all the major faiths in one form or another. Now, as Anna mentioned, I am a translator of classical Chinese, mostly for Penguin Books. I've translated most of the great Taoist and Buddhist and Confucianist classics of China. And I've worked a great deal with the Taoists of China. We've been running programs helping them protect their sacred mountains for many years. And in Taoism, you have some extraordinarily profound insights and teachings. And in the Tao Te Ching, which is the sort of core text of Taoism, in chapter 28, you have this. And it's really about what are we? Understand the thrust of the yang, but be more like the yin in your being. Be like a valley that parts to its stream. Be like a stream for the earth, and channel it so it flows to the sea. Be newborn. Be free of yourself. Be humble. Be earthy. Be a valley for the whole world. Be a channel for energies here. Weave them in a true and practical way so that they can link up with the way and become one again. Oneness generates everything. When the sage rules in the light of it, he rules everything. A wise man never tries to break up the whole. Another wonderful phrase is to age with the sun and the moon and be renewed by spring and summer, to conserve the seeds of growth, and autumn and winter to be nourished by the eternal breath of the Tao. In Taoism, there is a tripartite relationship between heaven, earth, and humanity. And our role is to ensure that the balance is maintained. The 2 great myths of ancient China are of a horrendous drought that is solved when Yi the archer shoots 9 fake suns out of the sky, and a terrible flood when Yu the Great channels the floodwaters and saves the earth. There is nothing moral about yin and yang. There is nothing good or bad about yin and yang, but excess of either is dangerous. Our role is to hold the balance. If we then look at Hinduism, we have again a fantastic sense of our place and our belonging and our meaning and our significance. And again, it's about who and what are we? Where do we come from? What is our very nature? What is our body? Because in Taoism, our body is a microcosm of the universe. Every part of our body is a part of the cosmos. And in Hinduism, you have this wonderful saying, which comes from one of the Upanishads. In the center of the castle of Brahman, our own body, there is a small shrine in the form of a lotus flower, and within can be found a small space. We should find who dwells there, and we should want to know him. And if anyone asks, who is he who dwells in a small shrine in the form of a lotus flower in the center of the castle of Brahman? Who shall we want to find and to know, we can answer. The little space within the heart is as great as this vast universe. The heavens and the earth are there, and the sun and the moon and the stars, fire and lightning, winds are there, and all that now is, and all that there is not. For the whole universe is there and dwells within our hearts. We are divine. We contain within us this fusion between, as it were, the given and the ungiven. But then if we move to one that you may be slightly more surprised about, and that is the Bible. And in the Bible, particularly in the writings of St. Paul, we come across this notion. You are the temple of God, with the Spirit of God living in you. You do not realize your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you and whom you have received from God. So use your body for the glory of God. So we have these great traditions that feed into much of what you do as wellness. But it's mind, body, and soul. And I've been very impressed by the focus on mind that I've seen here and the work that you're doing there, but singularly unimpressed by your explorations into spirituality. So we have these great traditions. I've just picked on 3, and they don't always get it right. Taoism, for example, believes that you can only achieve immortality if you have a physical body with which to go into the afterlife, which is why they have this pursuit for immortality in 2 different forms. The oldest form was this idea that if you could ingest and eat imperishable things like jade, gold, or mercury, so that your body transformed into imperishable things, you'd live forever. Actually, it usually meant a rather painful early death. If you ever don't, eating mercury, you will go mad before your body then collapses. And in fact, the first emperor of China, almost certainly, who died wading into the sea to fight a dragon that nobody else could see, probably died from 10 years of taking mercury. The hope was your body would be transformed into a permanent body. It didn't work. And so they discovered that it was a much better idea to instead kind of imagine that through meditation and practices you could build an inner body that could survive, a body that was eternal because it was rooted in the eternal form. In Hinduism, you have, of course, extreme asceticism, a complete denial of the body, of feeding it in certain traditions, one of which is my favorite in the Jains, who are an offspring, if you like, of Hinduism. They have one sect which is called the sky-clad sect. This means they run around naked because the last thing they want to do is to burden their body with anything physical. And the final one, well, Christianity, we've had a fear of the body. And Lord Byron, who had no fear of the body, he used it quite liberally, has a wonderful phrase about going to visit a cave somewhere in Spain where a rather strange saint, Honorius, had lived, who used to wear a hair shirt, never washed, never cut his hair, never did anything particularly nice, would flagellate himself occasionally if he got bored, you know, the kind of thing. And I'm sure, you don't? Oh, I'm so sorry. Gosh, I've so misunderstood wellness. Anyway, moving on. He writes this wonderful, wonderful phrase in his poem called The Pilgrimage. He says, "Deep in yon cave, Honorius long did dwell, in hope to merit heaven by making earth a hell." Does that not capture some people's worlds? Sadly, it does come from that. And I would have to say, I spend most of my time working with environmentalists, UN, World Bank. First of all, can I just say how wonderful it is to be at an event where I'm not the only one telling jokes, which is normally my role with all these terribly serious people who think the world's about to end. But I do worry about the kind of neo-Puritanism that I see in the environmental movement, and I think you are a wonderful counterblast to that. But there is also a deep and great wisdom within the faiths that we perhaps need to recover. I had the great privilege of translating Zhuangzi Zhuangzi is one of the great philosophers of Taoism. He lived probably somewhere around the 4th century BC, and he's extremely funny, but also extremely wise. And Penguin asked me, they have a series called The 100 Great Thinkers, and they asked me if I would do selections from Zhuangzi for that, and it's called the Dow of Nature. Short plug, it's out there on the bookstall. But I think I love this. This you'll get, especially if I can read it. The feet can be forgotten when you walk in comfortable shoes. The waist can be forgotten when your belt fits comfortably. Knowledge can forget yes and no if the heart journeys contentedly. Nothing changes inside, nothing proceeds from outside, if you respond to what occurs in a contented way. By starting with what is contented, not undergoing that which is disturbing, it is possible to know the contentment of forgetting what contentment is. Within Hinduism, you have this great wisdom, again, about the relationship between our body and the rest of the universe. And in one of the wonderful phrases, again from the Upanishads, from the Bhagavad Gita, let there be peace in the heavens, the earth, the atmosphere, the water, the herbs, the vegetation, among the divine beings, and in Brahma, the absolute reality. Let everything be at peace and in peace. Only then will we find peace. And within Christianity, we have only recently realized how incredibly wise monastic diets are. The 2-5 diet that's so popular is based on the Benedictine rule of St. Benedict, drawn up in the 6th century AD. We know a great deal now about how spirituality has informed us and made us more of who we are and protected us from our own stupidity at times. But there is also a further challenge, and the further challenge is this, and it comes from within the Orthodox Church. In the Orthodox Church, they see our role as being the priests of creation. We are here simply yet gloriously to be the means of God's grace to the rest of creation. And so often in environmental meetings, we're all sitting there going, oh God, it's going to be so wicked, we're so bad, we've polluted the earth, etc. And the Orthodox response is to say, yes, yes, yes. Imagine that you're here to be a blessing. What would you do? But it also calls for a cost. And the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, the first amongst equals of the patriarchs of the 400 million Orthodox, says this: we must attempt to return to a proper relationship with the Creator and the creation. This may well mean that just as a shepherd would in times of greatest hazard lay down his life for his flock, so human beings may need to forego part of their wants and needs in order that the survival of the natural world can be assured. This is a new situation, a new challenge. It calls for humanity to bear some of the pain of creation, as well as to enjoy and celebrate it. It calls first and foremost for repentance, but of an order not previously understood by many. And I want to finish with a wisdom from Judaism. The Torah are the first 5 books of the Bible, first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, which in Christianity is known as the Old Testament. And with it comes the Talmud, which is a commentary, much of it almost contemporary with the time of writing of parts of the Bible, certainly over 2,000 years old. And they have a wonderful story about what happens when Adam is put into the garden. And Adam is put into the garden by God in Eden, and he wanders around and he sees a pear tree, and he thinks, oh, pears, I think I quite like pears. Never actually eaten anything before, but I'll give it a try. So he goes to reach for the pear, and the tree whisks the pear out of his reach, and he goes, oh, well, it's probably not interesting anyway. Then he sees a plum tree. He thinks, oh, I'll try a plum. So he reaches out for the plum, and the tree whisks it out of reach again. He goes, well, not that very keen on plums anyway. And then he comes to a banana tree, and the same thing happens, and an apricot tree, and the same thing happens. And at this point, he is monumentally pissed off with existence, frankly, and not that keen on God. And he kind of stands there in a humph. And he goes, what's going on? And God says, first, water, care for, and tend the tree. Then you may eat of its fruit. We've forgotten that crucial link. And I want to end with 4 things that I think we need to tend. And you can call this spirituality, you can whatever you want to call it. I call it my faith. We need to tend our relationship with the divine, with God, whatever, whoever you think it, they, she might be. We need to tend our relationship with our neighbor. And our neighbor is not just the person who lives next door or the people we like. It's actually the people we don't like, and it's the people we don't know. We need, and this is where you're good, we need to tend the relationship with ourselves. And that's been much neglected for a long time. But finally, we need to tend our relationship with the rest of creation. We have been asked to be part of something unbelievably wonderful. Nature is God's gift of stunning abundance. And I invite you to join us with the millions and millions of people of the major religions who are now working to protect our planet, to join us as pilgrims on a journey to walk more gently on the land that we have been given, but that we do not own. Thank you.